Welcome everyone to the second of the series of the Science of Teaching Math Education webinars on the topic strengthening teacher content and pedagogical content knowledge. We are so happy to have you all joining us. My name is Amu Fall, and I'm the project associate for the Bill and Melinda Gates Science of Teaching grant and support the coordination of the math community of practice and webinar series. Today, we're joined by a very diverse group. We have folks coming in from India, Canada, Nepal, the US, the United Kingdom, South Africa, Kenya, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Belgium, El Salvador, Philippines, Zambia, Nigeria, Honduras, Lebanon, and Ireland, and many more. We're made up of researchers, professors, consultants, academic administrators, project and program implementers in the education sector, early grade teachers, current and former, education managers, students, and social workers. And we have a wide range of organizations and universities in attendance. And we range in experience as well, from those who are just getting into early grade math in low and middle income countries to those who are having some experience to those who are experts in the field. So to start, I'd like to share our agenda for today. So we will start out with introducing the presenters. I'll go through and give you a bit of information about each of them. And then we will detail the purpose of the webinar series and the community of practice, which has shifted over time since even our last webinar, as we've gotten a lot of wonderful feedback and discussion. We'll then move into 3 presentations and a panel with those presenters. We'll have a question and answer session, breakout groups, and then regroup and report out for each breakout group. To start, I'm very pleased to reintroduce Dr. Wendy Ralangita, who actually presented in our last webinar. Dr. Ralangita has more than 25 years of experience in teacher training and teacher education. She's provided capacity building to practitioners and policymakers on core aspects of materials, curriculum, and instruction to support learning of mathematics and reading at the primary level. Dr. Ralangita also has extensive research experience and implementation experience in teacher learning and approaches to provide ongoing support to teachers. She has a great deal of expertise in primary mathematics, teaching and learning, reading, teaching and learning, teacher professional development, and qualitative research in mixed methods. And we have our first presenter, Dr. Mercy Kazima. Dr. Kazima is a professor of mathematics education at the University of Malawi, and she has substantial experience in teaching and researching mathematics education in Malawi and the Southern Africa region. Welcome, Dr. Kazima. Dr. Lynn Bowie. Dr. Bowie is a director of mathematics at Alico Maths Education and a visiting associate at the University of Witwatersrand. She has developed material and design programs to support mathematics learning at all levels, from early grades through to university level. She's been involved in pre-service and in-service teacher training, as well as training youth to facilitate after-school maths clubs for primary school learners and after-school classes for high school learners. Her research interests include the preparation of primary mathematics teachers, understanding learning gaps in mathematics, and work on the mathematics curriculum. Her main passion is finding ways to ensure that all learners in South Africa have access to high quality, enjoyable, and stimulating mathematics teaching and learning. Welcome, Dr. Bowie. And we have Norma Evans. Norma Evans is a former mathematics teacher, curriculum coordinator, and a faculty member at Simon Fraser University in Canada, where she developed and delivered undergraduate and graduate mathematics methods courses for pre-service and in-service teachers. Norma has served as a technical director and chief of party on USAID-funded programs in Guinea, Madagascar, and Rwanda. Since 2013, she supported numerous initiatives in Egypt, Ghana, Senegal, Madagascar, and Malawi, and she recently served as a research designer for the 2024 UNESCO Spotlight Report examining mathematics curriculum and instructional materials alignment in 5 African countries, and co-technical leading for the UNESCO Mathematics Global Proficiency Framework for measuring progress against Sustainable Development Goal 4.1.1. Okay, welcome, Norma Evans. And I will now hand over to Wendy to give an overview of the community practice and the webinar series.
Thanks, Ami. Yeah, sorry. Welcome, everybody. I was just distracted for a second there. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you in our second quarterly webinar under the Science of Teaching Math Community of Practice. And the community of practice is still early, and we're still looking at growing it, but it's about sharing resources, networking, and discussing with each other, fostering opportunities for collaboration, sharing research evidence. We will, both through the community of practice and after the webinar, give all of you a voice and an opportunity to tell us what you want to see in future webinars and what you'd like to participate in terms of the community of practice, what kind of activities you'd like to see. And we want to garner sustainability and grow the community beyond the end of the Science of Teaching. We're starting it under a Science of Teaching grant, but when the grant ends, we certainly hope that the community of practice will continue. And I think in a nutshell, where the community of practice in the webinar is all about just geeking out with other people who really enjoy math education and learning from each other and sharing and connecting. Before we start with the presentations, Ami, did you have the poll results to share?
Yes, I do. So for the first question, have you been involved in a teacher professional development program focused on math pedagogical content knowledge? 73% of you said yes, and 27% said no. And for the second question, in your geographic area, is math pedagogical content knowledge considered an important topic? 52% said this is a priority area. 43% said this is somewhat a priority area and there's some discussion. And 5% said that this is a new area.
Okay. So thank you for sharing. Okay, there's a mix, but I'm glad to see the majority sort of are in places where this is being thought about at least a bit. So the three presenters that we're going to share today, as Ami mentioned, we'll have some presentations. We're going to have questions for the panelists, for the presenters, both from myself as a moderator, as well as from you all. And then you'll have a chance to be in small groups and discussing with each other some of the topics that are going to come up through these presentations. So I think we'll turn it over. Ami, So I'll turn it over to Mercy to tell us about her experience with some of the things they've been doing and learning about supporting pedagogical and content knowledge for teachers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I'll talk about developing teachers' mathematical knowledge for teaching, giving an example of a project from Malawi. Next slide, please. This is part of a bigger project, which was called Strengthening Numeracy in Early Years of Primary School in Malawi. We focused on the first two grades of primary, grade 1 and grade 2 teachers. And we worked with a total of 11 schools during the period 2019 to 2022. And in these 11 schools, we worked with all the teachers of grade 1 and 2. And in total, we had 136 teachers. We offered professional development to these teachers using a lesson study model. Lesson study is where teachers work together to plan and teach a lesson and learn from it. The process which we worked with the teachers, we started with a workshop in May of each year. And at that workshop, we looked at number concepts, counting in grades 1 and 2. We looked at teaching and learning, and we also introduced a lesson study. And between May and November, we had lesson study at each of the schools. And the project team would visit the schools and worked with them through the lesson study. Then in November, we had another workshop where they reported about their lesson study, and together as a whole group, we'll discuss what we have learned from all the schools' lesson studies. Next slide, please. Now a bit about lesson study. Our aim was that the teachers should learn from their own teaching and from their own students' learning. So as at each school, we had the teachers working together as a group, and they would plan a lesson that they would study from the mathematical content that we did in the first workshop. So they would draft a lesson plan, and the project team would look at this lesson plan and review it and give feedback, would give written feedback. But then we'd also visit the schools and discuss with the teachers about the lesson plan and how to improve it and so on. Then they would revise the lesson plan. And may I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. And then they would revise the lesson plan, and from the group, sorry, the previous one, the previous slide. Yes, it's that one. They would revise the lesson plan, and then they would pick one of the teachers from that group who would teach the lesson, and the others would observe. They would have a discussion to reflect on the lesson and report on what they have learned from that lesson, from what they have learned about their teaching and their learners' learning, and we'll have a discussion at the next workshop. Next slide, please. Now about the mathematical knowledge for teaching that we learned from the project, we analyzed the teachers' reflections before and after the professional development. So the teachers were given a journal, each one was given a journal where they wrote their reflections before, sometimes during and after the workshop, after the professional development. And from that, we learned after our analysis that teachers' understanding of number and counting improved. So for example, at the beginning, before the workshop, they would describe their teaching of counting as counting forward and counting in ones, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and not much else. After the PD, they would describe their teaching of counting, like also counting forwards and backwards, counting in groups, skip counting, identifying pattern as they count, and so on, something that showed some improvement. We also noted from the analysis of their reflections that the teachers' views about teaching and learning changed from teaching as transmission and learning as acquisition to teaching as transformation and learning as participation. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mercy. And we'll turn to Lynn now for their experience with pedagogical content knowledge.
Lynn, sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that is very much in process at the moment. So the research is very much ongoing, which is a project supporting teachers using the WhatsApp API. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. So really the context for this is that as an organization, an NGO, Olico, that I work with, we were contracted to provide the maths content for an after schools program for grade 4s. And originally, when we started this in 2023, we'd simply provided a very detailed teacher's guide, and then we were asked to do 2 in-person training sessions in the year. And we realized through the course of 2023 that this was clearly very not sufficient at all to support the teachers in delivering the program. And so what we added on in 2024 was this WhatsApp course, which leaves off the power of the WhatsApp API. So allows us to deliver content, and the bot can then deliver questions, answers, feedback, and some interactivity automatically. And our choice of WhatsApp was because phones are the tech our teachers have access to, and WhatsApp is the one app that teachers are very familiar with and using. So you can see here just a little screenshot of some of what would come on the course. course, there were their little videos delivered over WhatsApp, and then a set of questions, interactive questions for the teachers that follow up. And the real notion, what we were trying to do in the course was to give more detail on the what that they needed to actually deliver, but also to start giving some sense of the why we'd done things in the way we'd done them in the course, and so ultimately build the teachers' mathematical knowledge for teaching. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. And I think that one of the things that we have probably, I'm going to just give you some lessons we've learned as we go. And the first is less is more. We'd had great ambitions in the beginning about we were going to get them to improve their own knowledge through running through our 2-Minute Tango app, and we were going to have them upload a video every week, etc., etc. And it was clear that 2 different tech delivery mechanisms at one time was far too much. It was, let's just focus on the WhatsApp course for now. And then the second was a big learning around change management, that what we hadn't realized was that the teachers had no culture of preparation, and so had simply walked into the class with the book and started teaching. And so our notion of getting them to spend 30 minutes working through a course to prepare was something that we needed to work really hard to bring teachers on board with, and that took a while. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, please. The next thing that we learned, and I think we'd had some sense of this beforehand, is that key messages do need revisiting. And this comes, Sims and Fletcher Wood on their work in CPD talk a lot about this in terms of the cognitive load that we put onto teachers while doing professional development. And so we tried to reduce our messages to what we call the 3 C's. The first is that we want to move our learners on from counting to calculating and comfort for numbers. We want to regularly be checking that they're understanding us, and that we're looking for connections, and in particular connections between representations and concepts. And we could see that, if we go on to the next slide, the importance of revisiting these ideas because what we saw is well into the course, a good month into the course, this was one of the questions that was asked on WhatsApp, which essentially was around what way is acceptable for learners to be doing 22 plus 7, or would we expect at this stage? And by this stage, almost 50% of the teachers were still saying that they would be perfectly happy with learners counting up in 1. And this is great. At grade 4 level, certainly not what we've been prioritizing in the course. So this importance of coming over and over back to the same message was really important. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please. The other thing that I think that we're starting to see, and only the data is just coming through for us on this, is around the real difficulty that teachers have being able to shift their attention from just telling learners what to do to being able to really give some reason and to explain why. And so what we saw in asking them in the pre-test this question, I don't know, my screen's gone funny now. I don't know if others can see it, but the question was, how would you help your class answer a question like what minus 23 is 14? And although the vast majority of the teachers could answer this question, their way of explaining it was simply to say, I'd simply tell the teachers tell my learners to add. So any notion of using any form of representation or giving any kind of explanation as to why you would add was something that the teachers couldn't do. And a number of them would work out the answer of 37 themselves and then work back from that to tell the teachers how to do it. So there was quite a lot of confusion of finding a way to explain why. If we go on to the next slide, what we found as a very useful mechanism for being able to really probe into what our teachers were getting from this was we asked them every 4 weeks to upload a little video showing how they would explain how to a learner to solve something like 9 minus what is equal to 6. And in that, we saw kind of quite a lot of the stuff like I've shown in the test, things like the teacher would say, okay, so I'd first go 6 + 3 is equal to 9. Then I'd put it in the part whole diagram. Then I'd say, there's where you get your answer. No understanding of how those representations we've been asking them to work with might be used for problem solving. And so this is something that we're recognizing as being an important part that we need to work on for the rest of the course. And my time is up, so I'll skip the last slide.
Thank you, Lynn, and maybe we'll come back to that if we have a few seconds after everyone is finished. Norma?
Sure, thanks. If we could move forward. All right, I'm going to talk about a project that we did in Ghana a few years ago, which focused on building teachers' content knowledge and their pedagogical content knowledge through what we call authentic problem solving. About a decade ago, the Ministry of Education in Ghana was very concerned about the mathematics results, and particularly in early primary, that were actually getting worse over time. And they commissioned a group of 25 math educators in the country sort of to do a diagnostic report and identify what was not working in the system. And one of their main conclusions was that the way that teachers were teaching mathematics wasn't working, and it was contributing to low results, that it was basically procedure, explaining steps that children had to do, and then children would just repeat those steps. So there was no real great conceptual development or reasoning or problem-solving skills that were being developed. Can we move on? So we worked with the authors of that study and other people in the ministry to sort of come up with how would we change that? How would we change what teachers were doing in the classroom? And so we went back to Schoenfield's theory of teaching, which says that teachers' instructional models and practices they do in the classroom are really rooted in their knowledge and beliefs about learning and knowledge and beliefs about mathematics and mathematics teaching, but also rooted in what their goals are for teaching mathematics. And these are all rooted in the experiences they've had as learners. And that if we want to shift that, then we need to create situations which makes the current practices that teachers have problematic, that sort of will lead them to sort of deconstruct and reflect on what children are learning in their classroom, how it is learned, and what that says about how I'm teaching mathematics, about mathematics as a discipline. Next, please. And so we designed a program that would focus on trying to shift teachers' understanding of what mathematics is and the practices that support deep conceptual understanding. And so the ministry agreed that in the schools that we were focusing on, that they would release teachers an hour early once a week. And we would identify a volunteer teacher in the school who we would train to lead weekly reflection activities around mathematics. We also provided teachers with a program of studies for the year that sort of corrected some of the pacing problems in the curriculum. So they had weekly schemes of work, but the real core of the experience, professional development, were these weekly sessions led by volunteer teachers. And the volunteer teachers actually had a mentor guide that they were using. And these weekly sessions started with an authentic math problem solving activity that was keyed to what the teachers were teaching that week or in the next week. So they would engage in a problem solving activity. They would reflect on that and say, look at questions like, how did I learn? What helped my learning? What didn't help my learning? And what was the role of the facilitator? And what was the role of the learners in the group? In some cases, we had them watch videos of what teachers were doing, and we would ask the same questions. They did some micro-teaching. They tried out assessment tasks, and then there was at the end of it, they would do a co-planning with someone who taught at the same grade level. Can we move forward, please? So we did this in a number of pilot schools, and then we expanded it to 2 new school districts, and it focused on grades 1, 2, and 3. So here's an example of some of the problems that they would start with in their weekly sessions. So some of them were more content-related problems, like the one in black, and other ones were pedagogical content knowledge and the type of problems that Deborah Ball uses in her work around getting teachers to understand how to teach mathematics. So those are just 2 sample problems. So what did we learn? Can we move forward? So what happened? Well, we administered some anonymous surveys to look at teachers' attitudes and their self-confidence. And what we saw was even after 8 months, we saw these huge jumps in teachers' attitudes, positive attitudes towards teaching mathematics, and in their self-confidence as mathematicians. We asked them to rank order the 10 different inputs that we had sort of to shift their practices. And they identified working through math problems and hearing out others solve the problem as the second most important professional development activity. The first was actually a 3-day workshop that we did at the beginning of the year to kick off the initiative. Some of the things that we spent a lot of time and resources on ended up at the bottom of that list, though, and that included a very detailed teacher's guide on how to teach mathematics and how to put in use the weekly schemes and so on. And what we saw was after 1 year, the teachers who were in the pilot program used significantly more inquiry and reasoning-based mathematics instructional strategies, and that was data that was collected by an outside organization, Social Impact, through classroom observations in an RCT. Can we move forward? Next slide, please. And the interesting part, we saw huge gains in pupils' math scores. And this was after 8 months, and it was at phase 2 of the program, where we expanded to 2 new school districts and every school in those 2 districts. So after 8 months, we saw anywhere from a 3 to 5% difference in the scores in the traditional EGMA tasks. And then we added 5 what we call GENA tasks, which were tasks that were trying to measure more conceptual understanding. And in those ones, we saw a difference of anywhere around, on average, 18% difference in the scores of students in the pilot program versus students who were not in the pilot program. So we saw a huge increase in pupils' math scores. I'm going to leave it there.
Great, thank you. And so maybe from a few minutes, we're going to have time for Q&A. I'm going to take advantage of the role of moderator to first ask a few questions, and then we'll invite questions from the audience. I mean, maybe we can stop sharing screen for this time so we can see the panelists as they answer questions. So if you please feel free while we're starting off this period to put questions in the Q&A if you want, but then also when we get to audience questions, we'll also, we can also have folks raise their hands and unmute to ask, but also, either way, you can put them in the Q&A, you can wait and raise your hand in a few moments. So I'm going to start off with a couple questions first for the panelists. The first question is for each of you, if you could share, as you were doing this work, something that surprised you along the way, whether it's about teachers' reactions or something you observed. What is a surprise? What is something that surprised you as you were doing this work? I'll start with Norma. I'm just going from left to right on my screen. So no, yeah.
I think that the one thing that surprised us was that the things that we thought were really important and that we spent a lot of time and energy on in terms of helping teachers understand, including this massive teacher's guide, turned out for the teachers to be less of a contributor to their professional development. And that the lived experience of working together, solving problems, talking about how they solved it, turned out to contribute far more to understanding understanding what they needed to do in the classroom and coming up with maybe an understanding of what mathematics is all about and what their goal should be as teachers. That
is super interesting, given the effort a lot of us, have been making on the teacher's guide. So that's a super interesting reflection. Thank you, Lynn. I'll turn to you next. I think you already shared a little bit about some of the surprise, but I'd love to hear anything else you have on that.
No, I mean, I think that the biggest surprise for me was I'd assumed that given that the course was very directly helping them to prep for their very next lesson, it was highly kind of linked to what they were doing on the ground. I thought the take-up would be easier, and I was very surprised at the amount of work we had to do to get teachers on board, given the kind of lack of culture of preparation.
That's interesting. And Mercy.
Thank you. For us, it was how much teachers appreciated working together as a group. When we came in, that was not one of our agendas, like to say, to get teachers to work together. It was a means of the professional development. But when we did our evaluation, that came topmost, that they appreciated working together as a group, because previously they would have the responsibility of teaching a class belonging to that particular teacher of that class. But now they were seeing teaching mathematics as a school's responsibility of what they should do in the classroom. That was something that we didn't plan, but it came up as a good output from our project. Thank you.
Thank you. That's also a really interesting reflection. In fact, I'm looking at the clock. I'm sort of running out of time, and I want to make sure to give opportunities for folks in the audience who have questions. So I'm going to hold my other questions. I did want to invite Lynn. I know you had to skip the last slide. If there was something that you wanted to point out from that, before we go on to questions. I felt bad that you had to.
No, nothing crucial. Let's go on to questions.
Okay. So I'm just looking to see, where is the Q&A? I lost the Q&A. Okay. There is a couple questions from Sunil. Let's see. Well, I'm going to go, Sunil, you asked a question to Norma, but I think it might apply to the others as well. Sunil talks about the time given to helping teachers understand teachers' guides. Apart from training, what other strategies have you used to try to help teachers understand the guide, the strategies and methods used to help the teachers try to understand the guide. And I'm not sure if the example that you shared in your presentation was directly related to the teacher's guide, or if it was sort of a different direction. And I think this certainly applies to Lynn as well, who talked about, that the teachers having this teacher guide and sort of trying to figure out how to help them use it, or how to support the teachers in their instruction. So
I think that's a really good question. And I should point out that the teacher guide wasn't a structured one that had lesson plans. It had a weekly overview and then suggestions of activities that you would do during the week as you tried to meet sort of the learning objectives for the week. And then it had the mental math activities for the week. So there was a lot of latitude for teachers as to how to build lesson plans from these ideas. We definitely covered that in the 3-day workshop, which they liked the 3-day workshop. And then the last part, the co-planning, was to look in the teacher's guide for that week with someone from your grade level, go through those activities and pick out the activities that you were going to do, and to do some co-planning to sort of shape that week. So it was built into the weekly sessions, but Mercy pointed out, it was Lynn, I think, who was talking about the teachers don't have a culture of planning, where you would sit down and plan a week's activities. So maybe we made assumptions as to what time they had available and how they would take these weekly ideas and actually form them into lessons. So maybe the teacher's guide was less powerful for them because it required some initiative and some choices.
That's interesting. And actually what you were just saying and what Lynn said earlier really sparked for me thinking about almost everywhere that I've worked in some form or another. The teachers are required to have their lesson plans. that a district official or the principal or somebody comes and they check and make sure they have their lesson plans. So this reflection that you're sharing really, you know, is interesting, given that we know that lesson plan, you know, having lesson plans is often a requirement in so many contexts. And so being able to step back and think about what is happening there exactly, and what, you know, what are the messages teachers receiving about what preparation is, and et cetera. It's just some ideas about that swirling around in my head that are interesting. Lynn, either if you want to, you know, go farther on the sort of preparation thing, or have any comments and respond to the question about training teachers on the use of teachers' guides.
So, I mean, the teacher guide thing was kind of very instructive for us, because we had thought, and we had a very scripted, essentially, teacher guide that we'd originally worked with in 2023. And I think the teachers simply didn't read it, didn't look at it. And that is, we've really learned that the course that we give is very closely linked to that teacher guide, and that the option of watching videos. So once we've got the teachers on board, they've been very responsive and very pleased about the videos that they're getting, and find those far easier to access than the teacher guide. So in a sense, the teacher's course, the little videos, etc., mediates the teacher guide to them. And because of the sort of dynamic nature of the kind of images and things that you can show in a video, it's far more able to give them a sense of what it is one's talking about. I mean, you can see from my examples of what we haven't managed to get across yet that there's a lot still that needs to be understood, but certainly the teachers have kind of been really appreciative of the video format, far more so than the written teacher's guide that we'd used with them previously.
Oh, that's interesting. Mercy, reflections on, and I keep going that way. I'll have to go the other way next with the next question. So Mercy, if you have any additional reflection.
No, Wendy, we didn't have teacher guides per se in our project, but we did have our feedback to teachers. So maybe to answer the question of how we made sure the teachers understood the feedback, we would visit them. Apart from writing the feedback down, we visit the schools and discuss that feedback with the teachers. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. So now I'm going to open it up for anybody who might be interested in asking a question. If you can raise your hand, and I'll invite you in the order that I managed to see hands go up. I'll invite you to unmute and ask your question. You can raise your hand. You could also still add questions in the Q&A. I do see another question by Sunil, but I'd love to give other person. Oh, here we go. Oh, this is just a general, if the teacher's guides that you're referring to are in the public domain, folks would love to see them. So if that's something that is possible, you could share a link in the chat, but I know that often isn't the case. So anybody who have a question, you can still pop it in the Q&A or raise your hand. I don't see any hands immediately. I might go to one of my other questions that I came in with. I think I'm going to turn to actually the sort of latter part of your presentations, particularly Norma and Mercy, who are, you know, have sort of already completed the intervention investigation and tried to understand what was happening with teachers. I would just love to hear about your thoughts on understanding the impact of the intervention on teachers. You tried some things, like you were talking about journal writing. Norma, you did have some, you know, learning gains that you were able to look at. I would just love any of your reflections and thoughts about how to, once you do these interventions or try out these interventions, thoughts on how to understand the impacts on teachers and what effect they're having. I will start with Mercy this time, and go the opposite direction.
I think for us, we looked at, we used teachers' views, what they wrote as what would tell us the impact on their teaching. So I'm not sure I understood your question clearly, but I think maybe you're talking about how using the views would help us understand. Is that correct, Wendy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's the general question. So you had some things that you did to try to understand what impact the lesson study, the whole lesson study process, what impact that was having on teachers and you know, their instruction, as well as their, you know, the way that they think about teaching math. And I was just wondering about the your reflection on the methods you use to try to understand that, whether you feel like there might be, if you were to do it again, would you use different methods? How can we understand better when we're doing an intervention with teachers, what kind of impact it's having on them?
Okay. Yeah, for us, we used their own reflections, and we thought they're telling us what they think was happened, what they think they learned from the project, what they think they learned from the professional development, and what they are doing now that is different from before. We learned from them, from their own evaluation of themselves, what was different. And if we had to do it again, I would put in some kind of testing, maybe testing the teachers before and testing the teachers after. But that requires a very good instrument, because a good instrument will tell us something about the teacher knowledge, but a bad instrument will not tell us anything. So in this one, we didn't do that. If I had to do again, alongside designing the project, I'll probably work on how can we measure this teacher knowledge. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. Since I'm going in the other direction, Lynn, I know you're sort of earlier on, but would love, you've probably been thinking about that as well, and would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So, I mean, as Mercy said, the pre and post test idea is the most obvious, but it's really hard to create something that actually kind of gets at the essence of it. But the one thing that kind of I'd like to note is that these little 1-minute videos that we ask teachers to upload, literally talking hand videos, where we ask them, you know, to how they would explain something as if explaining it to a learner, and just do that explanation on a piece of paper while sort of videoing their work and saying what they needed to say. We found those to be incredibly powerful in terms of just being able to get a snapshot of how they are viewing the mathematics and the pedagogy over time. And because each of them so far have done 3 or 4 of those videos, we're getting a kind of sense of whether they are building up a better explanatory power. And so we see the potential of this as having, you know, some way of being able to not measure, but at least for us have a sense of whether one aspect of their teaching is improving over time.
Thank you very much. And Norma, I'll have you chime in on that before we do have one hand raiser. So
yeah,
then I'll go.
And I have to go back with Mercy's. We had some very basic instruments to measure. I'm not so sure we had the depth of instrument that we needed. We had the attitudinal survey that we self-administered, an anonymous one, pre and a post. And that did show us that things were shifting. It's a self-report attitudinal one. And the only other way we had of looking at what was changing was doing teacher observations and looking to see if the way that they presented mathematics and the way that children interacted mathematics was changing over time. So it was an observation of what was changing, if anything, in the practices. And so we started with a list of about 15 practices that the ministry was interested in seeing in a mathematics classroom that would represent a shift in how you view mathematics or how children are to experience it. So those were our main instruments. I mean, we measured changes in student understanding, but we couldn't actually do a correlation or link that to anything. We've got different sources of data that tell us that things changed, but we can't say that students improved because of.
Right. And also there could be kind of a delay. So it can be kind of hard to interpret, you know, what you see in children improving or not improving. It can be also hard to know if you hate to see, you don't yet see a change, because there's a delay when the teachers change their practice to the student performance. So it's a tricky one.
That's why we were surprised, because the RCT was done 8 months after we introduced the program into these 2 new school districts, that we did see changes in teacher practices, and we saw these huge changes in student learning outcomes. I'd like to think it was because of that beautiful teacher's guide we built, but we don't know.
Right.
We can't attribute anything. We know what
Right.
teachers said was powerful, but
yeah, very interesting. Okay, the last question, Sunil, I'll invite you to go off mute and ask your question, and then this will be the last question before we go to groups. We're already a minute or two behind. Sunil, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy. This is Sunil. So my question, in one presentation, I saw good improvement in the basic calculation, addition and subtraction, the word per minute, EGMA data. So I would like to know that how what actually has been done to improve the fluency of the addition and subtractions, because we see in the India there are lots of children who still struggle in getting in becoming fluent in the basic addition and subtraction. So what are the key strategy and how it has been incorporated in the instruction design, or what has been done to improve it, so that it will help us also to incorporate in our design.
So if anybody has an answer, we could take 1 or 2 answers, and then we'll move on to breakout groups, so we have enough time for those groups to discuss as well.
Since I presented some EGMA results, we did focus with teachers and in the guides and during the weekly sessions on mental computation, but mental computation based on reasoning. So we always started with a game or an activity around mental computation that they could then adapt for their classroom. But definitely a lot of the problems that we had them engage in had to do with understanding computation. So that we were trying to get the teachers to understand whether it's place value and its impact on computation. We were really trying to get to the conceptual understanding. Is that what made the difference? As I said, we don't know what made the difference. We just know there was a difference.
Great.
There were no new textbooks. We didn't have any money for textbooks. All we had was the teacher's guide and this training.
Thank you so much. Okay, so now, Ami, if you could put back, we're going to have time for breakout groups now. There'll be 3 groups, and you will choose which one you want to join. So group 1, or it will come up as room 1, I think, is more about the idea of pedagogical content knowledge. Like we heard folks talk about mathematical knowledge for teaching, pedagogical content knowledge. There's other frames and ways of thinking about what teachers need to know. So this will really dig into what do these different frames define, what teachers need to know.
But if we have pedagogical content knowledge, so that has to be connected with the mathematical ideas. So mathematical connections is needed. So foundational learning is very important and crucial. So if we have pedagogical knowledge, and then only the students will develop lifelong learning. So that was the second one. And the third one is, at the same time, we also got opportunity to share. So there could be several other frameworks as well. So since or similar frames, for example, in these days, we can also talk technological pedagogical knowledge. That is what people call TPAC. So I do not mean that technology means very hi-fi technology. So there could be several local technologies and several cultural practices also that should be explored from our own. So such as ethnomathematics could be one area where we can connect cultural practices in lower grades, and that really connects students' day-to-day practices with formal mathematics. So in this way, we discuss this mathematical knowledge of teachers and pedagogical content knowledge. They should go side by side, and foundational learning is very important. That has to be connected with mathematical concepts, and for that, the cultural practices also can be connected. So I think I completed in 1 minute.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll move to group. This sounds like an amazing discussion. Group 2, and Nana is going to share with us 3 main points from that discussion.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. So we realized that in our group, everybody in the group had to was working with teachers in terms of building pedagogical content knowledge and content knowledge of teachers. And one thing we all agreed on was that pedagogical content knowledge, the development, when the training is done by the right people, then it is going to be effective. So one thing we also agreed on was that it was expensive to train teachers with developing all those materials and all that. And some of the challenges also had to do with the workload of teachers. The teachers are already loaded on the field. And so if they will have to also take time, read the manuals, and then develop lessons, that is a bit of more workload on them. So we realized that the intervention being used by Lynn and her group by developing videos and all that was very effective. I think that one of our participants talked about the fact that some of the challenges they've had in terms of early grade mathematics is the teachers moving from concrete to abstract, and that there's always a bridge that is difficult for them to fill. And then we also realize that if teachers are allowed to work in groups collaboratively to share their experiences, I think that Francisco shared that, where teachers share their experiences, how they've been able to improve the knowledge or the content knowledge, then other teachers can learn from the shared experiences of others. We had a participant in Ghana who talked about the difficult students have in mathematics and how his organization is also creating opportunities for teacher mentorship to develop teachers' content knowledge. Yes, so thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you. It's a really hard job with these super interesting conversations to boil it down to, you know, just a few things in a minute. So I appreciate that. And finally, I'm going to ask Norma. Our note taker wasn't able to be here today for group 3. And so Norma is filling in for both facilitator and note taker. Turn it over to you.
Okay. The question of whether or not we should be focusing on measuring learning outcomes, we looked at that there are different levels you get to before you might see changes in learning outcomes. That you want to see whether or not measure any changes in teachers' knowledge, whether there's any change in their ability to reflect on their practice, whether there's any change in their ability to apply new practices in the classroom before you actually get to student learning outcomes. So depending upon where you are, you might want to focus on measuring these different layers. We talked about the difficulty of measuring application in the classroom, looking at the difficulty of really designing an easy-to-use tool that really gets at those nuances, and so that we get an accurate picture of whether these qualitative changes we want to see in the classroom are actually there. And we have some colleagues who are working on those tools to see if they can come up with something that's easy to use. And finally, we talked about the importance of aligning things and making everything transparent. So we have an agreed upon set of definition of what we're looking for in the classroom, or the type of knowledge we need in order to teach mathematics, that is shared with everyone, including teachers, and that our tools align with that, so that we're measuring the changes that we expect to see.
Great, thank you so much. What great discussions. We just have a couple minutes, so I'm gonna turn it over to Ami, so she can give just a little bit of information about the upcoming things related to community of practice and our future webinars. So I will stop talking. Thank you all, and I'll turn it over to Ami for closing information.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy. And I would just like to extend a huge thank you to all of our presenters and Wendy, our moderator, and Nana Banod for giving such thorough report outs, and Norma as well for stepping into that role. I think this has been such a wonderful opportunity for everybody to come together and have these really fruitful discussions that we will continue on in our community of practice and in the next webinar. So just quickly, we do have a feedback survey, which you can either scan here on your screen with your phone, or you can take the link in the chat that I've just sent. And then additionally, we have a code here for you to join the Math Community of Practice. We previously, well, currently we have it on our website, on the Science of Teaching website, but we will be shifting over to LinkedIn as we think it'll be a bit more accessible. And just to let you all know, I will be sending these links in an email following on, so no pressure to do this now. But with that, thank you all for joining us today. The next Science of Teaching Math webinar will be this fall, likely in September. So please keep an eye out for communications related to that. Thank you all, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day and rest of your week.